To all of you joining from around the world, a very good morning, or evening as the case may be. I'm Justin Scott from Temasek Polytechnic in Singapore, bringing you our 5th live webinar for 2015. This webinar series is brought to you jointly by the Singapore Training and Development Association, better known here in Singapore as STADA, and the Center for Transcultural Studies at Temasek Polytechnic. And through these webinars, we seek to create a platform for knowledge sharing by connecting thought leaders from around the world, actually. Now this morning I'm delighted to introduce to you one such thought leader, Paul Meshanko. Paul, as you see there, is President and CEO of Legacy Business Cultures. And I can't think of a more fitting guest for our global webinar this morning than Paul, who has reached out and touched over 250,000 leaders and business professionals on 5 continents, and has had his material translated into over 25 languages. At Legacy Business Cultures, just a bit about that, Paul and his team work with clients to create best-in-class workplace cultures. He's going to tell us a bit more about that shortly, but let me brag on you, Paul. Recent clients have included DuPont, Symantec, Ingersoll Rand, Johnson Controls, Eli Lilly, and several U.S. government agencies, among others. Now, Paul's first book, Conversations on Success, was published in 2006, but it's his recent book that we're here to learn a bit more about, The Respect Effect, using the science of neuroleadership to inspire a more loyal and productive workplace. Now, Paul has studied how the human brain responds in a variety of workplace situations, and we'll discuss some of his very, very interesting conclusions about the transformational power of respect in the workplace over the next hour. So without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Paul. So Paul, over to you.
Justin, thank you very much. I want to start with a very quick story. I want to thank you for taking the time to get to know a little bit about me and Anton also. Sometimes when we're speaking, that's not always the case. 2 years ago, I was asked to come down and speak to a group here in the States in the city of Columbus, Ohio. And the person that asked me to speak, he called me. He said, "Can you come down and speak to our leadership group?" And I said, "When would you like me to speak?" And he stopped for a moment, and he said, "Tomorrow?" So what do you think it means when somebody needs you to come and speak tomorrow? You were not their originally intended speaker. So I was a good sport. I said, "I'm happy to help." But the person who introduced me had never even met me before. And so he got up to the podium after lunch and he tapped on the microphone. He said, "Okay, everybody, it's time for our after lunch speaker. I'm not sure what his name is and I'm not sure what he's going to talk about. In case he has something good to say, let's get it on with. In case he's not, let's get it over with." So, Justin, I'd like to thank you for that kind introduction and sharing the love a little bit. Should I turn the screen share now at this point?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, let's see. Here we are. It's not going anywhere. There. Okay, can we see that?
That's it.
Okay, very good. So what I'd like to talk about, our time is very short today. In fact, I was sharing with some of the panelists that I actually taught an 8-hour version of this workshop today, which is going to go in which went into much more depth. But I want to give you an overview of what we call the 12 rules of respect. Actually, it'll be a subset of those 12 rules, but it's really about the neuroscience behind relationships and the neuroscience that actually can lead to building a more engaged workforce. Our time today is very short. We'll have only about 40 minutes. And so my objectives for us as an audience today are pretty small. The first and foremost is I hope to help everybody have a little bit of fun. I like to keep things on the lighter side, so hopefully a little bit of my humor will come through in an appropriate way. But from a content standpoint, I'd really like to explore the science behind respect and how it supports both employee engagement, but even then, going further, how it supports world-class business results. As a part of that conversation, once we make the business case for why respect is so important, I will share with you a subset of the 12 rules that you will immediately be able to put to work. And even for those that we don't cover, if you have printed out the handout that was sent out ahead of time, you actually have a complete list of those 12 rules. If we have time at the end, which I am told we will, we'll also have a little bit of a question and answer period, and I will have a short case study to share with you about just how significant an initiative that focuses on respect can be. For those of you who are on social media, I would welcome you to follow and connect with me either on Twitter and or LinkedIn. I have a personal goal to connect with 2,000 LinkedIn members by the end of this year, and I still need about 300. So if we get a bunch of people from tonight that will connect with me, that would be wonderful. Just mention this event and I'll absolutely accept your invitation. As far as taking notes today, I want to make an offer. I'm not going to expect everybody to copy down everything on the PowerPoint slides, but what I'd like you to focus on are your takeaways, the things that to you are applicable from the conversation. And I will make the slides available through our sponsors this evening, later today for us, and so everybody can actually have a PDF copy of the slides. Okay? And you can simply send me an email message to my address or connect with me on LinkedIn and ask for the slides, and I'll send them to you that way. Okay? So let's start with a basic question. Why focus on something as fundamental as respect? This seems like, to many people, such a simple concept that it doesn't warrant a lot of attention. And I think what we'll find this evening is that it is deceptively simple, but it is far more complex than most people realize. In working with both our corporate and government clients, there are a series of top reasons that typically come up, and I'd like to share some of those with you. The first of those is that as civil societies, we value something called social justice, which is a fancy way of saying that because we're all human beings, we deserve to be treated with dignity and respect by each other. And I think if you asked most people, they would raise their hand and say, yes, I agree with that. The problem is, I think that all of us also know people who, even if they raised their hand and said, yes, I agree with that, they don't treat people very respectfully. And so just because I say it and say it's important doesn't necessarily mean that I do it. So we need to create more of an incentive. Another reason is that respect absolutely improves perceptions of inclusiveness, which then leads to improved engagement and teamwork. In fact, those of your organizations that are focused on diversity and inclusion initiatives, what you will find is that globally, respect is the universal language that leads to inclusive workplaces. Respect leads to inclusion, which then leads to engagement and teamwork. Another reason respect is important is because it oftentimes minimizes the costs associated with legal liabilities. When people go outside of the norms of expected and accepted behavior and do things that are either discriminatory or just plain disrespectful. Oftentimes that leads to lawsuits. Sometimes, though, even more consistently, it leads to diminished productivity. In the United States alone, last year, the total costs associated with acts of disrespect and the damage to productivity and the financial loss to organizations in the U.S. was over $2 billion U.S. And I think most of you would agree that regardless of which culture, any money spent on damages from disrespect is probably too much, and money that we could spend doing more creative and innovative things. A fourth reason is that respect is directly tied to our ability to provide high customer service. In fact, it's very difficult for any of your employees to give their best service to your customers, whether they're internal customers or external customers, if they themselves don't feel as though they're being treated with dignity and respect. The final reason that I'd like to talk about is really going to be with the focus of our conversation. It's that respect biologically programs and primes our brains to do their very best work. And this is not a feel-good concept. This is a biology concept. When each of us feel that we are treated with respect, it actually frees the parts of our brain most responsible for productive work, regions of the brain commonly referred to as the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain that does complex thinking and problem solving and prioritizing and collaborating with other people. When I'm treated with disrespect, that part of my brain goes silent, unable to do work. So by focusing proactively on respect, we actually cause the fight or flight circuits within the brain to go on low alert and actually allow us to do our very best work. But even when we feel safe, there's even a higher state. When we go out of our way to actually let our employees know that we value them, that we believe they're smart, they're intelligent, they're capable of great contributions, we actually externalize that respect and we put their brains in an even higher level of productivity. And that's really what we're after today. The highest level of biological readiness that we can put our brains in to do great work on behalf of our customers. And respect is the gateway that we go through to do that. Let's talk about what we mean by respect.
Paul, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry for the interruption. The slides on my end are not advancing. So are you able?
Oh.
Are you able to?
Let's see. Maybe I'm not on the page view mode. Let's see here. How about?
There we go. Are you able to go to reading mode?
Is this it? Is this better?
That's it. Now we're with you.
Okay. I apologize. Technical error on the facilitator's part.
No worries.
So let's talk about what respect is. And I'd like to put the word respect in front of you with another word that is oftentimes discussed at the same time. And that word is tolerance. So a question I would ask each of you is, do you think that respect and tolerance are the same thing, or are they different? Most people tell me that they believe these are two very different concepts, and in fact I would say that they are. Respect and tolerance are different in that tolerance, while we certainly think it's okay, is not a very high standard to set for ourselves. In fact, tolerance is like hitting the easy button. Our brains actually like tolerance, though, because it doesn't take a lot of energy or effort. Respect, as we're going to discover, is much more of an active process. So what I'd like to quickly share with you is a diagram or a model that we call the road to respect. And right in the middle, you will see tolerance. And tolerance is a passive state of being. But because it's passive, the brain actually likes to go there because it doesn't take a lot of energy. The human brain is one of the most energy efficient organs in the body. But even as efficient as it is, it takes a tremendous amount of energy. Our brains only take up approximately 4% of our body mass, but they actually require minimally 20% of all the energy our bodies can turn the food that we eat into, in the form of glucose. And on our very busy days, as much as 35% of all the glucose our bodies create goes to keep our brains working. So when the brain doesn't have to spend energy, it doesn't. And tolerance is a very easy way to do that. However, because our workforces are becoming much more diverse, we have people from different nationalities, from different age groups, different lifestyles with different values, it is oftentimes impossible just to stay with tolerance. So we have to start spending more energy to figure out how to deal with people. Now here's where biology and anthropology play a role. When our ancient ancestors were walking through the plains of Africa or the jungles of any place, and they came upon strange groups of people, strange tribes, their first instinct was one of suspicion. In fact, being suspicious of strangers is a very normal state for human beings, especially as adults. The problem is that when we engage other people with suspicion, our behaviors are distinctly non-productive. Because in most cases what we do is we avoid them. We spend energy to go out of our way to not have to engage them because we don't understand them. But it takes energy to avoid people. And I would ask each of you in the audience today, how many of you have individuals within your organization that you go out of your way to avoid sometimes? So not only does it take energy, it also takes creativity. Even a higher state of energy requirement is when we become hostile with each other. And hostility is any energy that we expend that harms another person in any way, whether we're harming them physically, emotionally, reputationally, or even hurting their ability to contribute their best work. That's hostility. And it's also hostility, the energy that they have to spend, other people have to spend to protect themselves from other people's hostile actions. If you looked at all the energy that organizations spend either with avoidance behaviors or hostile behaviors, that energy represents lost productivity to the organization. As human beings, we do not have an inexhaustible supply of energy. So energy that is spent in avoidance or hostility is energy that cannot be spent coming up with new ideas, collaborating with our partners, and taking care of our customers. But the problem is we are suspicious by nature. So how do we overcome that? Well, the answer is actually very simple. The answer is to go back to a state of mind that we knew when we were much younger, when we were children. In fact, when we were children, rather than being suspicious of people who were different, we were curious. We wanted to explore those differences. And so that's in fact what we did. When we can replace suspicion with curiosity, we approach each other to understand our differences and to give them context. We engage them rather than avoiding them. And it is through this process of engagement that we actually develop respect and rapport with one another. The main point here is that you cannot get to respect without taking the time and making the effort to engage each other. There are no shortcuts. Respect takes work. But what is easy, relatively easy, is to learn to replace suspicion with curiosity. So if there were a definition that I would suggest, it is this. Respect is an active process of non-judgmentally engaging other people, exploring with them, seeing what their differences are and sharing with them what our differences are, but doing it non-judgmentally. And we do this with people from all backgrounds, regardless of what their differences may be. The benefit from making that investment in time in one another is that we both increase our awareness and our effectiveness. Why do we increase our effectiveness? Because the more we get to know each other, the more predictable we become to one another. Our productivity in working as parts of teams and collaboratively is very much dependent on being predictable around one another, and making the engagement time to learn about one another is the way that we do that. Now, the final part of the definition for respect is that we engage people in a manner that esteems both myself and those with whom I interact. Another word we could use is value. What this means is that we engage each other in a way that makes the other person feel valued and makes me feel proud of the way I've handled that interaction myself. We become literally mutually dependent on one another for esteem and value. So what does respect actually look like? Well, I would ask each of you to think about a time or a person around whom you typically feel very much respected. What are the behaviors that we demonstrate to prove this? Well, it might be something as simple as giving somebody our undivided attention and not looking at our iPhone or something while we're talking to them. It may mean giving them a compliment. It may mean giving them support when they're working on a very challenging product. It may mean asking somebody's opinion and listening to the answer and then actually implementing their suggestion. All of those actions and many more, they result in a flood of positive emotions. We feel valued, we feel motivated, we feel important, we feel smart, competent around one another. We feel included, and we feel inspired. That's what respect feels like. Now, When we have those emotions, what's really important is we, my friends, have actually triggered a chemical reaction in our brain. Respect can be practiced by any action or behavior that promotes another person's well-being or makes them feel connected to either you or the broader community that sustains them. That's what respect is all about. And as I just said, it actually triggers a very powerful biology. When we feel all of those positive emotions, what we're really experiencing is sort of a drug high, if you will, what we call the pleasure cocktail in neuroscience. Serotonin, which is directly tied to our sense of contentment and pleasure. Oxytocin, which is tied to our ability to trust one another. And dopamine, which is the actuator and actually makes us want to reciprocate the kind gestures of other people back to them or to even other people. I'd like to share a quick quote with you from one of my colleagues, Dr. Matt Lieberman, who is a neuroscientist, a director of neuroscience at UCLA University in Los Angeles, California. And he said, "Love and belonging might seem like a convenience that we can do without, but our biology is built to thirst for connection because it is linked to our most basic survival needs." I'd like you all to consider our ancient prehistoric ancestors and the conditions that they lived in. And while we would think initially that food and water and safety would be their primary necessities, in fact, the way the human brain evolved, they are not. Our primary necessity is connection and community with other people, because it is only in communities and with connection that we are able to secure efficiently food, water, safety, and shelter. No individual is able to provide those things as effectively on their own as they can when they're a part of a community. In fact, that need is so great for human beings that our brains have developed circuitry to literally become the most social brains on the entire planet. We are truly wired to be connected to one another, and respect actually helps us capitalize on that chemistry and that connection. When we're successful at creating respect in our organizations, the benefits are significant. First, we know that employees typically find a much higher level of satisfaction doing the job that they do. We are physically healthier. We report sickness and disease less often. We are able to attract, engage, and keep our very best talent. And we promote inclusion. We promote an environment that invites everybody, regardless of what makes them unique, to be a full participant in the success of our business. Additionally, respectful environments enjoy tremendously successful communication patterns and habits. Necessary and vital information goes up and down and sideways to anybody who needs it without restriction. Organizations that are respectful also enjoy greater creativity and innovation. Innovation is a byproduct of smart people interacting with each other and sharing ideas. And when we have respectful cultures, there are more of those interactions, and therefore we come up with more new and exciting ideas. We have more satisfied customers, we're more productive, we're ultimately more resilient. We make it through tough times better, all because of a climate of respect between people. At the same time, we have to take a look at how damaging disrespect is. In fact, I would like each of you to take just about 15 seconds and think about a time that is still vividly fresh in your memory about when you were treated poorly by somebody. Think who that person is and think about what they did. Maybe they interrupted you. Maybe they made you look bad in front of other people. Maybe they were telling stories about you and gossiping when you were not around. Maybe it was something as subtle as rolling their eyes and laughing when you were sharing information. Whatever it is, disrespect has an immediate consequence because it triggers the fight or flight system in our brains. Again, when that fight or flight circuit is activated, we become literally incapable of doing the best work possible. The other problem with disrespectful behavior that intimidates or frightens people is that it immediately goes to long-term storage in our memories. We do not forget it. And this actually is for evolutionary purposes. We store information about things and people who frighten us, who threaten us, or cause us harm in order to recognize them in the future and avoid them. This is critically important, especially for leaders to recognize. If we treat our employees with disrespect, we are damaging the human assets in our business because they will never give us their best efforts. Sometimes not because they don't want to, but because they are physically incapable of it. Disrespect, therefore, is shown by any actions or behaviors that damage another person's sense of well-being or weakens their connection to the communities that they rely upon to sustain them, including their work communities. When we sever that connection or weaken it, it makes everybody, and it makes the entire fabric weak. The chemistry behind disrespect, similar to respect, is very predictable. When we treat each other with disrespect, it triggers the fight or flight chemistry, which is cortisol and adrenaline. These are not bad compounds because they kept us safe. They literally kept us safe for thousands and thousands of years whenever we were in the presence of danger. The problem is our prehistoric ancestors were not subjected to danger on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis. In fact, it might have been days or weeks at a time between true situations when the fight or flight circuits were activated. But in the workplace, it's different. People who were disrespectful yesterday will probably be disrespectful today and probably disrespectful tomorrow. And that constant dripping of cortisol and adrenaline into our systems is very toxic. In fact, a single incident of disrespect can cause adrenaline and cortisol to persist in our bloodstream for up to 3.5 hours. What that means is that we potentially take a human asset of the business offline for up to half a day. But it even gets worse than that, because every time that person then thinks about the person who treated them with disrespect, it triggers the same response all over again. And so one simple act of disrespect that is not apologized for can linger and cause damage to productivity for days and even weeks into the future. Long term, the damage is significant to the organization and its efforts. We compromise the ability of our employees to become emotionally engaged. In fact, in disrespectful work cultures, work simply becomes transactional. Our employees give us 8 hours or some hours, number of hours of their day, and we give them money. And that's it. That's all they want. They look at just the money and nothing else. The other consequence, which is more significant, I believe, is that we have a significant increase in stress-related illnesses. Long-term exposure to distressful and disrespectful environments is a contributor to heart disease. Cortisol is actually a known contaminant and a toxin to the human body in long-term dosages. It actually causes scarring to the inside of our blood vessels. When our blood vessels become covered with scar tissue, they then start attracting plaque, and we become much more susceptible to cardiovascular disease. Now, however, we're really realizing that there's an even greater danger, and that is that cortisol is actually toxic to our brains. With long-term exposure in disrespectful environments, we actually can weaken the synaptic connections between the neurons in the brain, and even in severe cases, kill the neurons themselves. So not only does disrespect make us physically sick, but it makes us dumb and stupid at the same time. And I would ask some of you, if you have ever left a workplace because of the way you were treated, when you started a new job, you probably immediately felt a little bit smarter, and that's because your brain was not being handicapped by that exposure to cortisol. Another thing that we experience with disrespectful cultures is higher rates of absenteeism and accidents. It's very difficult to pay attention to the work that I'm doing if I'm having to worry about conflicts and being treated with disrespect. My head and hands are doing different things, and I'm more prone to accidents. we tend to lose a lot more people voluntarily. And when people leave a company voluntarily, it's usually the good ones, the ones that we wish we could keep. Why do they leave? Because they have more choices of places to go. Information does not flow freely in disrespectful organizations. People become very calculating with what information they share and who they share it with. They want to know, what will I get for sharing this information? And who else is going to see it? Symptoms that we don't have in respectful organizations. At the end of the day, our customers also suffer, because when those of us who are responsible for taking care of our customers don't feel respected ourselves, it is virtually impossible to give the customers our very best attention. Ultimately, we become less productive and less resilient. When the environment around us gets difficult, we collapse because we can't rely upon one another to be strong. I will share just a very quick amount of research with you that was done in the United States several years ago at Georgetown University. And the research wanted to find out how frequently, at least in the United States, workers felt that they were treated with disrespect. But then the survey also wanted to find out what people did when they were treated with disrespect. And I think the results will surprise you. Half of everybody surveyed said that they were treated with disrespect at least once a week. I'd like you to think about your own organization and what the pattern is there. If your organization has 1,000 people and you're typical, that means that possibly 500 people each week would say that they were treated with disrespect by someone. Now, the rest of the questions are about what people did when they were treated with disrespect. Almost half said that they intentionally decreased the amount of effort that they put into their work. Almost the same percentage said they decreased the amount of time that they actually spent working. 38% intentionally decreased the quality of their work. 80% lost time worrying about the incident and the person involved. 63% lost time avoiding the person who treated them poorly. 66% said their performance declined. Almost 80% said that their commitment to their employer overall went down, even though it might have only been 1 or 2 people who were involved. 12% actually left their job and went someplace else. I would hazard a guess or imagine that those were 12% who were probably high performers and chose to go someplace else because they could, because they had the best skills and they didn't have to put up with poor treatment. Probably the most startling statistic is this. 25% of all of those surveyed said that at some point or another they ended up taking it out on their customers. I hope at this point I have made a good business case for why proactively focusing on respect is so critically important, because the very success of our business depends upon it. I do want to share with you one very, very quick case study about a company that you are probably mostly familiar with, a company called DuPont, headquartered in the United States, that took this topic very, very seriously. You see, DuPont, as a company, has 4 core values: health and safety, environmental stewardship, ethics and integrity, and respect for people. And while they were doing very, very well, according to their employees, in all of these areas, they weren't doing quite as well with respect. 99% of their employees said that they were doing an outstanding job with their commitment to health and safety. But when it came to respect for other people, shockingly, only 86% said that they were doing a great job. 86%? Why, that's tremendous. Most CEOs would say, well, let's move on to something else. But DuPont's CEO said something very different. She said, well, how come, and her name is Ellen Kullman, she said, how come 99% of our employees think that we're very fully committed to health and safety, but only 86% believe that we're committed to respect? We can do better. And so they embarked on an effort that began in 2009 and went all the way through 2014. We created a custom half-day workshop on respect. We translated it into 24 languages, and then using their own facilitators, which went up to 700 across the globe, we rolled this out to over 70,000 employees so far through 2015. What impact did this make on the business? Well, I'll put it in their own words. Ana Molinos, who is their Respect for People champion in Spain, had the following to say: as gratifying as it has been to hear the positive personal feedback from our employees, the Respect Initiative is very much a business growth strategy enabler. Employees emotionally connect and contribute hard to an organization which values and allows them to grow both as human beings and as professionals. We believe that the Connecting with Respect process positively impacts our employee value proposition and strengthens our ability to retain and attract the very best talent in our marketplace. It continues to be an unforgettable journey for our corporation and has become instrumental in impacting the way that we conduct business both internally and externally. Offline, they shared with us that a focus on respect was so powerful that it became the single most powerful cultural initiative that they had embarked upon in over a quarter of a century. Our time is limited right now, so what I would like to share with you, at least in part, is some of what we refer to as the 12 rules of respect. And my hope is that even the ones that we don't cover today, you can cover and review on your own, whether it's in the handout or in a copy of my book at some point. These are very powerful skill sets that we can learn to develop right away and apply both in the workplace as well as our communities. The first rule of respect is to become aware of your nonverbal and extraverbal cues. You see, the human species has only had language for approximately 30,000 years. But we've been communicating for much, much longer than that, for hundreds of thousands of years. So how did we communicate prior to words and language? Well, we used gestures and grunts and tones, and we still do. So if we're trying to communicate respect to each other, we have to make sure that our words are consistent with our body language. Are we making solid eye contact? Or are we distracted looking at our iPhone? Are we smiling? All of these things matter. And when there is a disconnect, when our body language does not match our words, people are much more likely to believe the cues that we give with our body language. So make sure that if you're intent on practicing respect, it's a whole body experience for the other person. Rule number 2, go out of your way to reignite curiosity when dealing with other people, with dealing with their ideas, particularly people who see the world differently than you do. Rather than following the immediate human need to judge and compare, be curious instead. Go out of your way to try to truly understand what other people have to say and why they're saying it. And that by itself leads to a condition or a perception of respect in most people. Rule number 3, treat other people like they're smart. I'm willing to bet that each one of you, personally, likes to be treated like you're smart. What you may not realize is that our actual level of measured intelligence can increase by up to 12 points on the IQ scale based on how we're treated by other people. If the people around us treat us as though they believe we're smart, guess what? We act like we're smart. And the point is, everybody is smart. We may be smart in different ways, but almost everyone in your organization is smart and intelligent. And if we treat them that way, we're much more likely to get the highest level of contribution from them. I'm going to skip a couple and move up to rule number 8, which is very important. It's one of my favorites. Rule number 8 is learn to be wrong on occasion. One of the things that defines us as humans is that once we think we're right about something, we like to stick with it, even if there's evidence that we might not be right. The current research on this is very compelling. It suggests, in fact, that no matter how strongly I believe I'm right about something, the likelihood that I actually am is only about 50-50. I have 1 in 2 chance of being right and a 1 in 2 chance of being wrong. The problem is that when we believe we're right, we sometimes give ourselves freedom to treat other people poorly who don't believe and see things the same way that we do. So learning to be wrong on occasion is not only a sign of respect, it's also a sign of good leadership and wisdom. On occasion, however, we all make mistakes. We all treat people poorly even when we didn't intend to. In this case, it becomes very important that we quickly apologize. I mentioned before that acts of disrespect, when we're subjected to them, immediately go to long-term storage in our memory. But here's my challenge to you. There's a caveat to that, an exception. If sometime within the first 2 hours of being treated disrespectfully or poorly, the person involved comes back and makes a sincere apology to us, it interrupts the memory consolidation process. It's almost like hitting the reset button. If we honestly and sincerely apologize, the hurt almost doesn't go away completely, but it becomes healed. And therefore, the next time we see that individual, the first thing that we think about isn't how poorly they treated me the last time. I'm going to be honest, it takes courage. It takes courage and humility to admit when we're wrong and apologize, but I will say it also takes bravery. It's also one of the strongest signs of respect that we can give to one another. And as a leader, it makes you much stronger in the eyes of your employees. The final rule of respect is simple. Smile. There's nothing quite as inviting as a warm smile from our coworkers or our neighbors or even our family members. A smile tells people around us that we're safe to be around, that we're warm, we're welcome, inviting. We want them to be a part of our community. So I would challenge each of you, smile. Even if you haven't had your first cup of coffee yet in the morning, challenge yourself to greet each other with smiles and set the stage for a respectful day. The final thought I would like to offer is an invitation. If you, like I do, like inspirational quotes, if you go to our website, legacycultures.com, we have a free service called our Coffee and Keynote service. Every morning, U.S. time, on the East Coast, we send out an inspirational quote, something that we like to think of as a vitamin for our brain, something that gets us started on the right foot. And that we rotate between different themes: professional development, leadership, teamwork, and respect. So all of the quotes in a given week will follow one of those themes. It's something that we do just to try to help our clients and those who are interested have a great day every day. I'd like to ask you a question before we turn it over to questions and answers. And that question is simple. What will your legacy be with other people? The thing about the human brain is that we're not very good at remembering details about specific events. Who said what on a certain day? Who wore what clothes? What did we eat for lunch? We think we do, but we don't. But here's what we do remember very, very clearly about one another. We remember how we felt around each other. We create our own legacy in the minds of our coworkers, one interaction at a time. So the question is, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want people to remember you? When they see you coming down a hallway or coming down the sidewalk, do you want them to smile and lean into you, extend their hand in friendship? Or do you want them to turn and walk a different direction because they've been injured by you in the past? It's up to you. One way or another, you're going to create your legacy, and I hope you'll create one that you're proud of. So thank you for your time this morning. I would be very happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul. It's very interesting. Before we go into Q&A, you guys would indulge me. We have several industry experts that I'd like to take just a brief moment to introduce. We have Nick Chong, a business partner from Berners Consulting and Coaching, actually joining us from Brazil, so your side of the globe, Paul. We also have closer to Singapore, Lisa Call. She's joining us from Thailand. She's the corporate training manager for Minor International. And here in Singapore, but elsewhere on the island, is Miss Ayako Morioka. She's held numerous HR leadership roles within the IT industry. She is Japanese and has been based in Singapore for about the last 5 years. And last but not least, we have a number of student and staff from Temasek Polytechnic joining us today. So during the remainder of our hour, I'd like to open it up to questions, first to our panelists and then to those of you who are joining from around the globe. Any questions, please? Ayako, you're...
Yes, okay, so I will go first. Actually, the story was really, really nice, and it really resonated with my own experiences working in as a business professional, but also in HR. And so there are a couple of questions, but I will just go with one. And so when you implement this concept, and when any companies or organization are trying to really get this roll out in their organization, what were the key challenges that, well, conceptually, perhaps it is really everyone can sign up, but in the real implementation, what kind of challenges do you usually see or face, and what is the key success factor to really overcome them?
Paul, you need to unmute yourself, sorry.
Just kidding. Can you hear me now? Okay, that's actually a wonderful question. And I would say that traditionally the greatest hurdle is buy-in from senior leadership, that this is something that we should invest resources in. Because the higher up we go in the organization, the more we tend to be focused on tactics, on tactical execution, not so much the chemistry, the people chemistry within the business. But when we have enlightened leaders who understand that the emotional environment that we create for our employees directly affects business results, there's really very little resistance. In fact, what we found was that the training was so popular, there was a waiting list to get into it. And one of the reasons was because when we focus on something like respect, obviously there is a spillover into the personal lives of our employees also. We may learn a skill at work, but if we find that we can also apply that skill set at home, with our spouses, with our children, with our neighbors, then it becomes even more valuable because we become better people living in better communities at the same time. But the biggest hurdle is getting our senior leaders to agree to invest in a process that nurtures people, not just our business tactics.
Yeah, thank you. I can really relate to that too. Well, yeah, the focus on the business outcome versus, I don't want to say lack, but a less awareness of the importance of those emotional environment, as you just rightly said, that it is more of impacting the people's immune and productivity than what kind of strategy, what kind of initiatives are going to be rolled out.
Outstanding. Okay, so do we have other questions?
I have one here.
Oh, sure.
Let's hear from Nick first, and then Lisa has a question.
Okay.
Nick, go Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, Paul, that was extremely interesting, enlightening part from neuroscience point of view as well. Being a coach, and I train people in coaching, this aspect about respect is something very important. My question to you is, when you teach this respect, what is the form that you use to pass this through to the leaders? From my experience with executive, when we train leaders in coaching, most people ran away from this concept of coaching to coach their staff is because it's very difficult for them to be honest with their staff to gain their confidence in engaging in in a coaching conversation to begin with. So when you talk about respect, it's both ways.
Absolutely. So the nice thing about respect. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Okay. So the nice thing about respect is that everybody appreciates it. I think you would be hard-pressed to find a person who said they did not want to be treated with respect. The challenge is to not come across as though we're trying to fix people. Because if I have a workshop and I send you to my workshop because you're not being respectful, then it looks like a punitive action, right? However, what we can do is we can say, hey, let's not assume that we're being disrespectful, but let's assume that this is important and it's something that we can all do better at. So let's assume we're okay, but we just want to get better. And here's the business case for why we want to get better, because we know it helps create a much more productive workforce. So I think the part is, and this is, if someone gets a business coach, the assumption is, oh, they must not be doing very well. They must need coaching. So we want to create an environment where people don't think we're trying to fix them. We're simply helping them become part of a solution to create a healthier workforce. Does that make sense? Excellent.
Okay, let me unmute myself. It makes perfect sense. The linking question I have is, would corporate coaching or leadership coaching, instilling a coaching culture in an organization, actually instill more respect or build this concept of respect that you're talking about?
I think the nice thing about coaching is you can incorporate anything into it that you want. Now, one of the things that I would say that, and this actually goes with coaching, is how important a 360 survey can be. Do you use 360 surveys with your coaching clients? I have a lot of senior leaders who don't want to take a 360 because they're afraid of what people are going to say, right? So it takes courage to open yourself up to the feedback of other people. But if I don't know how I'm perceived today, how am I ever going to get better, right? And so 360s, if used only for development and not for evaluation, can be an interesting way to start the conversation and offer a person feedback as to how respectful they're perceived to be by others in their organization.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Paul. Lisa, you had a question?
Yeah. Paul, I just want to share your opinion, because in our company we deal more on younger generation, which is now generation Y. Yeah. So most of them, yeah, is part of it.
Why me?
Part of it, I do agree. Nick said senior leadership sometimes, right? Majority is, but we do have a lot of generation Y group here. So, which I think, what I just want to ask your opinion. What I think is freedom also one of the factors that can also also affect the respect that we say, because in here we give them a lot of freedom, so they feel that they've been respected. So one of it, our majority of that main factors is the freedom that we give to our employee. And so my question is that if I would like Paul to give us that maybe one example or activity or implementation that can immediately implement it to increase the awareness of respect. So what Paul will recommend to us?
I would recommend that when we are in face-to-face communication, we take this thing and we put it down on the table, on the desk, out of our hands. Because this, as great as this is, this prevents me from giving you my full attention. So I'm going to suggest that when we're in face-to-face communication with one another, If I know that I'm easily distracted, let's put that away. Let's genuinely learn how to give, to be fully present with one another. I think the young generation in particular struggles with that because the technology is so enticing and it's so rewarding to my brain.
I both hands agree. Correct. Correct. That's correct. Yeah. Not only them, the senior leadership team also, they are bringing them the other thing. Good, good, good. Very good. Thank you.
But we have to do this very slowly because if we take their mobile device away, their heart will start to race. So we have to start with slow amounts, maybe 30 seconds at a time, then a minute.
You see that none of us have our handphones with us. It's interesting you talked about the withdrawal symptoms. One that brings I had a question from John Tan who's watching online, and he asked, is respect something that is learned, or will it come naturally, not naturally? What's the default setting?
That's a really good question, and I think a lot of that actually comes from our parents and what we observed in them as we were growing up. So a lot of what we learn about respect is environmental in some forms. If we have been treated with respect, and that's been kind of drilled into our heads since we were young, it does come rather naturally. But if I come from a background where I haven't seen it very often, I may have a harder time getting there. It's conditioned. The other question that's very similar to this is sometimes there are some people who believe that respect has to be earned. I'm not going to give you my respect until you earn it. How many of you know people who act like that? So the problem with that is it puts me in the position of being a judge over you. I then judge when you are worthy of earning my respect. And that is a sign of insecurity in me, not about you. So I think that the more mature and the more secure a person is with themselves, the easier it is for them to naturally give respect to other people. Which is why in our longer workshop, one of the things we focus on is the development of healthy self-esteem. Because if I don't have a sustainable, good emotional state about myself, if I don't have warm regard for myself and confidence in myself, it's very difficult for me to extend respect to other people on a consistent basis.
Okay. Well, this is interesting because it ties into the next question that came from our viewers. Marco Ruby Cruz asks, many of the examples, the people who are held up as the paragon of visionary leaders, Steve Jobs, Jack Welch, are you know where this is going, are known to be disrespectful, firing people in front of an audience, they shout, they malign people. Are you suggesting there may be some insecurity with these guys, and that's driving that, or is there something that we're missing?
So there's two things. Insecurity could be there for some people, but according to most psychologists, about 1 to 2% of the general population are sociopaths. They don't care about how they affect other people. As long as they get done what they need to get done, they'll keep doing it. The problem is that in a capitalistic world where profits are so important, the investors, Wall Street, whoever is investing in, that's all they care about. They don't care how you get results, just that you get results. So sometimes those people actually can rise to high levels because they can beat other people in their production. But I will say this, you have to be an Apple to get away with that. If your company does not have the prestige of an Apple or an Amazon, that won't work. If you are a mid-sized company that doesn't have global recognition and you behave like that, good luck trying to keep your best employees because they won't stay with you. There's actually been research on Apple, and the reason that people stayed at Apple, despite Steve Jobs' personality, was not because they were treated well, but because they knew that it was something that was going to change the entire marketplace. They were so excited about the product that they were working on that they put up with it. There aren't very many companies that have that luxury.
Interesting, interesting. Thanks for that answer. Well, time has caught up with us, and is with much regret I need to bring the this very engaging session to a close. Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks to our panelists. And to all our viewers out there, thanks for joining today's webinar, brought to you by STADA and the Center for Transcultural Studies at Temasek Polytechnic. Go connect with Paul on LinkedIn, as he asked us to do that. As for today's video, you'll find it on STADA's YouTube channel. Search for STADA and you'll find it there. LinkedIn viewers, again, you can view this in the group called Community Spirit. As a wise woman once said about RESPECT, is all I'm asking for is a little respect. And as we heard from Paul today, that wise woman's sentiments were what each and every one of us and every employee wants to feel. And if our organizations can create that respect, people will stay motivated, be willing to go the extra mile. So on that note, this is Justin Scott, signing off from the Global Connect Village at Temasek Polytechnic here in Singapore. Until we meet again on December 11th with our next webinar, let me encourage you in your quest to create your own culture of respect with some words by another wise fellow. Never be afraid to try. Remember, amateurs built the art, professionals built the Titanic.
That's right. Good. Have a great day, everybody.